time and go ahead and get started. So this is an overview of what we will be discussing today. There are some materials for reference that I'll be talking about, as well as some of the eligibility criteria that will apply to these small systems. And the majority of the training will be spent on the actual Clean Water SRF construction application. I'll be going through each package, as well as some of the different reviews that go on and some tips on how to submit the application. And then I will also be getting into maybe something that a lot of the TA providers haven't been involved with as much, and that is the submittal of the FBA package and some of the construction administrative items that occur while construction is going on, things like status reports, disbursement requests, and things like that. I will be taking questions at the end of probably each section, time permitting, but there will be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the training as well. A little disclaimer before I get into things is that if you have any projects currently in-house with DFA and you have specific questions about them, I would refer them to your project manager. And related to that, if you are working on any ARs or work plans related to wastewater construction projects, refer those questions to your grant manager. So let's go ahead and get started. So not many people maybe are aware that there are 2 units that work specifically on these small systems related to the Clean Water SRF program. So these are the 2 units. I'm in the Small Community Water Unit. The senior is Jennifer Toney. And then there is another unit, the Small Community Wastewater Unit. The senior is James Garcia. So the PMs are those listed below. Hopefully they sound familiar. If not, hopefully we'll be working with you in the future. And here are some references and guidance for you all. The 2 biggest documents I would highly recommend you review prior to applying at any time is the Clean Water SRF policy and the Clean Water SRF intended use plan, or IUP. So the policy basically outlines some of the basic criteria, eligibility for the Clean Water SRF program in general, whereas the intended use plan is updated annually, and it's more like a financial plan of how we're gonna fund projects each fiscal year. And that's where you'll find the those famous tables of eligibility for grants, depending on where you land and things like that. Also, I have links to the Clean Water SRF construction application forms and instructions. These forms, I believe, were updated earlier this year. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, great. I'll be working through, the training will be based off of these attachments. And then the 2 emails that you can contact if you have any questions is the Clean Water SRF email, as well as the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions email. So some important definitions are, when I say subsidy, I mean the grant or principal forgiveness funding. Principal forgiveness acts like a grant in that these systems do not need to repay anything, but it is a different funding pot essentially. So when I say subsidy, I'm talking about both grant and principal forgiveness funding. The Clean Water SRF program defines a small community as one that has a population of less than 20,000 people. And the median household income, or MHI, is used to determine a community's disadvantaged status. And the 2 important definitions here are a disadvantaged community, or DAC, which has an MHI of less than 80% of California's MHI, and a severely disadvantaged community, or an SSTAC, that has a MHI less than 60% of the statewide MHI. So DFA utilizes the American Community Survey, or ACS, 5-year estimates to determine MHI. That being said, an income survey can be done by TA in accordance with the current income survey guidelines. So here is one of those famous tables that I was talking about earlier. This is taken from this year's Clean Water SRF IUP. And this essentially breaks down the eligible grant amounts depending on where the system lands. The overall population must be less than 20,000, but the eligible total eligible project cost percentage varies depending on your the system's DAC status. And then here is a very similar table, but if you see here, this is specifically for sewer, septic to sewer, or regional projects. So the maximum grant amounts and maximum cost per household are slightly higher for those type of projects. These tables, if you refer back to the IUP, have a lot of footnotes, but I wanted to highlight some of the more important ones that maybe you need to be aware of, and systems need to be aware of when they're applying for funding. So if a community receives a planning grant from DFA for the project, then the amount received under planning is subtracted from the maximum eligible construction grant. So an example is if a treatment upgrade, plant upgrade project serving an SSTAC previously received a $500,000 planning grant, then the maximum grant or principal forgiveness amount available for the construction project is $5.5 million. And a slight change to this year's IUP is that there is a $10 million cap in small community grant, principal forgiveness, or technical assistance funding in any given 5-year period. One thing to note whenever you're reviewing or preparing to submit an application is always refer back to that current IUP, but also keep in mind that these amounts are subject to change depending on what the IUP states. The project manager will communicate any changes that occur during the review process. And any non-routine or controversial projects will be considered by the State Water Board at a State Water Board meeting for funding approval. So if for whatever reason the projects need more grant funding or they have a high cost per household, those are the type of more common examples that we would see that we would need to go to the board for funding approval. So any questions before I move on to the construction application review process? Ibby, do we have any in the chat?
No, we do not have a chat feature available.
Oh, okay.
But I don't see any raised hands.
Okay.
Question, please raise your hand either now or you can raise your hand at a later time for the next section. We'll capture you then. Thanks.
All right, we'll move along then. So this flowchart illustrates the construction application review process. So basically, it all starts with an application being submitted in FAST. DFA management assigns the construction application to a project manager, and the project manager reviews the application for completeness. If there are missing items, then the project manager will inform the applicant and request those missing items. Once the application is complete, then the project manager will pretty much do an eligibility check at that point when the general and technical reviews are drafted, just to make sure that they are eligible for subsidy funding. And then the project manager will request environmental review. This is typically the review that is requested first, just because of the length of time it takes to consult with federal agencies on those cross-cutter items. So once environmental review is close or is complete, the project manager will request financial review. And then once financial review is close or complete, the DFA senior, so the senior engineer working on the project, will request consultation. And once legal consultation is close or complete, the project manager completes the general and technical reviews. And once all reviews are complete, the project manager prepares the project file for routing. And then the initial funding agreement is executed. At this point, planning and design costs are eligible for reimbursement. And, you know, important thing to note is this is kind of the standard review process. It is by no means for projects, certain projects, this may not be the case, but this is generally what happens. A lot of the times the reviews happen concurrently as well. So just something to be aware of. All right, so when submitting applications, to avoid delays, please make sure you are using the current application forms, and make sure that the application contains accurate and complete information. Make sure that the application packages and their applicable attachments are submitted in a timely manner. Please provide contact information for the environmental, the financial, the legal, and coordinate with DFA if there are any issues. The best place to submit applications, hopefully you all are familiar with the Financial Assistance Application Submittal Tool, or FAST. I'm going to refer you to the FAST website for any assistance in needed in submitting applications, but you can also contact the FAST help desk at their number there or at their email address. All right, so the general package. So this is the minimum document required to submit a construction application in FAST in order to get in our system and be assigned a project manager. This review is done by the project manager. So I'll be going over some tips, things we look out for, and things to keep in mind as you're filling out the forms. So this is the first section here. It is fairly self-explanatory. The applicant should be the entity that will be entering into the funding agreement with the State Water Board. It should not be the TA provider. When documenting the median household income, if you are unsure of what the MHI is, contact DFA. And then something else to note is the authorized representative title should match the title in the authorizing resolution. The contact person, this is usually where I see the contact information for the TA provider staff person who is working on the project. So just things to keep in mind. And then this is basic project information. Some things to keep in mind. The project title must match the environmental documents and authorizing resolution, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The amount of assistance requested and total project cost, please do not leave these items blank. We understand that the amount is subject to change and will be finalized during the review process, but just don't leave it blank. And then similarly, when talking about the project schedule, it is noted there that it is an estimated project schedule. The schedule is subject to change and it will be finalized prior to the drafting of the funding agreement. And then I'll be talking about the attachments in the next slide, but of course, must be signed by the authorized representative as designated in the authorizing resolution. And then the general package form attachments, one that is required is the potential clean water SRF flags worksheet. This used to be optional, but now it is required, and it's basically to alert DFA staff of any issues that might affect our application review. So it's good to keep us or inform us early so that we can plan accordingly. If there are no flags, great. Maybe just submit the worksheet with no flags noted. The other attachment is the priority score estimation worksheet. This is an optional attachment and is not required for projects serving a DAC or an SDAC. This is more for those larger systems that need a priority score or need a scoring in order to be added to our fundable list. But most of the time when TA is working with systems, they are generally a DAC or an SDAC, so I wouldn't worry too much about that worksheet. So any questions about the general package before I move on to the environmental?
If you have a question, please raise your hand. You could do so by going to the icon where it says more. There might be a little hand symbol. You can click on that next to your name. Okay, no questions at this time.
All right, so I'll move ahead with the environmental package. So this is a review that is done not by the project manager. It is done by our DFA environmental staff. That being said, we have been trained on things that we should be looking out for when we're reviewing the application for completeness, and I'll be going over that slides. Or yeah, so this is, again, more basic information. I'm going to reiterate this. The project title must match the environmental documents and the authorizing resolution. The project description must be consistent with both the environmental document and the project report. If they're not consistent, and may trigger an addendum needed or some sort of revised forms, either for the environmental document or if we need to update the project report. So it's important to be consistent. And the CEQA and federal cross-cutting documents must be completed prior to receiving a construction funding agreement. The CEQA and cross-cutting documents are eligible DFA planning costs and TA costs. And during the planning process, the draft environmental documents are submitted to our environmental staff for review. So they can catch maybe some things a little bit early, which is always good. And then these are basically the CEQA CEQA documents that we see for our project. An important thing to note here is that all the environmental documents must be circulated through the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, the state clearinghouse, and be less than 5 years old at the time a construction funding agreement is executed. If the environmental documents maybe are a little old, then it would trigger an addendum as well. So this section only applies to CEQA exempted projects. If the system believes that the project is exempt, then contact DFA to coordinate with our environmental review unit. I will say that it is pretty rare for wastewater construction projects to be exempt. So we want to make sure, that we are coordinating early if that is the case. And then this is just a screenshot of the section 4, the evaluation section for federal environmental coordination. This is not the entirety, but it basically goes through all of the potential cross-cutting documents and information that we might need. This section is required for all projects requesting funding. So these are the list of federal cross-cutting documents that might be submitted and be applicable to the project. I've starred here the most common ones that I've seen pretty much for every project for the most part, and that would be the environmental alternatives analysis. If the environmental document is an initial study or higher, then we request an alternative analysis be done. The Clean Air Act modeling or report, the biological report, the floodplain map or any other documents related to floodplain management, and the cultural report. So those are the most common documents that I've seen, and our environmental staff have asked us to kind of ask those questions if we don't see them initially in the application. And again, it says there, if your project is exempt, please let us know. Some of these documents may not apply. So any questions about the environmental package before I move on?
I don't see any raised hands at this time.
All right. So I'll just keep going to the financial package. So again, this is a review that is not done by the project manager. This is done by our financial or credit review staff at DFA. And again, they've trained us on things that we should be looking out for when checking the application for completeness, and that's what I'll go over. So this is the financial package form. Some things to keep in mind here: the pledged revenues and funds for the project is not applicable if the project is receiving 100% subsidy funding. If a loan is expected, the funds that we most typically see would be the entity's wastewater enterprise fund or sewer enterprise fund or something like that. So yeah, let me move on here. And then the amount of assistance requested, again, do not leave this blank, though it is subject to change and will be finalized during the review process. The term requested refers to the loan term. So again, not applicable if the project is receiving 100% subsidy funding. Other project funding sources should be included in the financial package form, and this section should be completed if the project is receiving funding from other agencies. The typical ones that we see are USDA, CDBG, or DWR, or even the entity's own reserves. So it's important to note those amounts early so we can coordinate with other agencies if necessary. Again, if the MHI is unknown, contact DFA for the MHI. This is the breakdown of service connections. If the applicant is an unsewered community and they are proposing a localized treatment option for the construction project, then Section 6 does not apply. Hopefully they've done a rate study at that point, but it's not shocking that they don't have that information readily available. All right, and I'll be talking a little bit about the rate study and debt management policy in the later slide. But some things to note is if a rate study has been done within the last 5 years, check yes and submit a copy of that rate study. And these are all of the financial package attachments that I'll be going over in the following slides. So the first attachment is the audited financial statements or tax returns. This is submittal of the audited financial statements for the most recent 3 years. So the table on the right-hand side gives you kind of a guide of what financial statements we need depending on when you're applying. If the system is privately owned and lacks audited financial statements, then tax returns should be submitted. for the same application time period for the 3 years. And then another thing to note is if during the review process, the credit analyst may request draft financial statements, depending on what time of the year it is, and if it is expected that a new audited financial statement might be available. And then budget projections, we want at least 2 years or more if needed. This is a sample of the projections that is given in the application instructions. The tax questionnaire provides basic information about the cost, accounting, and who will own and operate the project. This is a document that must be signed by the authorized representative, and it is reviewed by the State Water Board's Clean Water SRF tax attorney to determine whether the applicant is eligible to receive funds from bond sales. But this attachment is not required if the applicant is applying for 100% subsidy funding. The reimbursement resolution. So this is a template that is available as part of the financial package. So generally when templates are available, we instruct applicants to not stray from the language, try to keep it as close as possible. But the reimbursement resolution is not required if applying for 100% grant or principal forgiveness funding. And this resolution is also reviewed by our tax attorney. The authorizing resolution. So this is another one where a template is available. This is required for all funding recipients, regardless of funding source. Some things to note here: do not reference the project amounts and/or potential funding sources, because that is subject to change. Again, refer to the title of the authorized representative and not the names of the individuals, just because the personnel is subject to change. Individuals leave organizations, but the titles tend to stay the same. So if it is referenced as a person, then you run the risk of having to go back to the governing body of the system and having to update the authorizing resolution. And again, the project title must match the environmental documents and the application documents. Attachment F6 is the rate adoption resolution and the copy of rates and the public notice of the Prop 218 meeting. So here we're talking about the most recent board resolution, ordinance, or similar document like meeting minutes where the rates were approved that are currently in place. Like I said before, submit a copy of the rate study if it was completed within 5 years of applying for funding. Something to note here is that if rate study and Prop 218 efforts have not been finalized when you apply for funding, then the financial review may be put on hold until those efforts are finalized, just because we want to make sure we are working with the most current numbers so that they're not having to go back and redo calculations and things like that. So this is the schedule of system obligations where you document, or the system documents what debt they have. This schedule is an exhibit to the funding agreement. And if the system has no debt other than Clean Water SRF debt, then the authorized representative can submit a no debt letter stating this fact. And there are some additional financial package attachments listed here. The debt management policy is not applicable for projects receiving 100% subsidy funding. There is guidance on the California Debt and Investment Advisory Commission website on how to prepare this document. I should note that both the debt management policy and the rate study preparations are eligible planning costs and TA costs as well. The other attachments we don't see too often, but they do come up, is the special tax assessment district or the service charge projections, or the relevant service management operating or joint power agreements. Another attachment that may not come up very much for construction wastewater projects is the school district certification of interim report. This is only applicable for school districts. Not many school districts have their own wastewater system in place, but it might come up. So we want a copy of the report if it's available. Any questions about the financial package?
Reminder, if you have a question, please raise your hand. No questions at this time.
All right. So I'll just speak briefly on the legal consultation. So the legal consultation is initiated approximately 2 months. Oh, I see somebody raise their hand, maybe.
Yes, I will unmute them now. Hi, Jennifer. Can you ask your question now? Jennifer?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was waiting for permission to be unmuted. Thank you. So I have a question on the timing of when a rate study should be conducted. Occasionally, we're asked to do rate studies during the planning application. And I question when the right time to do that is, because if we don't know what the construction costs are, I'm wondering, should we wait until we have all the construction costs to perform a rate study?
That's a good question, and it's a question that comes up a lot. My advice would be, and this is what I see most often happen, is that they base the rate study on the current probable construction funding package in place, with the caveat that it is subject to change, and do it that way. As far as like scheduling during the planning deliverables and preparation of the attachment, that should be done, the rate study should be done after at least the draft project report is completed. Does that answer your question? Yes, no?
It looks like she got muted again.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I don't have control over my own microphone. Yes, thank you for that answer. That answers my question.
All right. Any other questions before I move on? All right, so I'll move on to the legal consultation. Again, so as I was saying previously, the legal consultation is initiated approximately 2 months before the expected funding agreement is executed. If the project is receiving 100% subsidy, then legal consultation will not be initiated. And this means that the system's local counsel is not directly contacted by our legal counsel. That being said, if there are issues that have been identified that warrant legal consultation, then legal consultation may be initiated. A signed legal opinion letter is required of all applicants regardless of funding terms. And this is typically, the language in the legal opinion is typically negotiated during the legal consultation, but if there is a soft close, then there is some generic language that the attorney must sign, and it must be signed either the same day or after the authorized representative's signature on the funding agreement. For projects receiving loans, this is a new requirement. A closing resolution is required, authorizing the transaction at the time of agreement execution. So again, this is something that the State Water Board Legal Counsel can provide an example of, but it is required before agreement execution. So the biggest thing I would say that we would run into in regards to legal consultation is that the applicant's local counsel might not be responding to our legal counsel's emails or phone calls. So I think the best thing a TA provider can do is inform the system, and they can inform their legal counsel to be aware that these contacts are coming and to respond to them in a timely manner. Any questions about the legal consultation? Okay, so this is the big one. This is the technical package. So this is a review that is done by the project manager. So I'll be going probably in more detail than I did for the other other packages, to kind of give you my tips and tricks on how to complete this technical package. So the first section relates to water rights. If a petition for change is needed for the project, we need to know, basically, and that's basically when the project changes the point of discharge or diverts flow from a service water body. If there are questions regarding whether a petition is required, please contact the PM, or the contact information for the individual at the Division of Water Rights is there as well. That being said, I have not seen this pop up for most of my projects. It typically occurs mostly for water recycling projects, but that being said, you know, always check to make sure, because if a petition for change is needed, that process can take 2 years. So it's important to note whether it's needed or not. If the entity is a water diverter and subject to the section 5103 of the Water Code, we want to know that as well. The urns database can be used to look up records. This is a public database. So you can search for the system and see if they require you know, statements and things like that, because we do check that information. And if it's not up to date, potentially after the funding agreement is executed, that is something we check when we are reviewing disbursement requests. So if it's not up to date, that might be putting the claim on hold as well. So it's important to note that information. I'll be talking about the water conservation attachments on the later slides. The Delta plan, again, this is something I've not seen come up. Essentially, if the project is a covered action, we want to know that information. And the Delta Stewardship Council website has information on what constitutes a covered action, and actually has a checklist to go through whether or not the project is a covered action. And then this section relates to A&E procurement. If you have questions with this, check with the system and their engineering consultants. They might have information about, you know, which one of these processes they complied with. This section relates to the Green Project Reserve. So this was a program that had funding through the Clean Water SRF program for those green projects related to green infrastructure, water efficiency, energy efficiency, and other environmentally innovative projects. In previous years, the principal of forgiveness funding was set aside for these GPR projects, but that is no longer the case. Principal of forgiveness is now set aside to the DAC and SDAC projects, so funding for GPR projects are no longer available at this time. And then this is the attachment checklist that I'll be going through in the next couple of slides. So the project report. So obviously this is a very big document. This document can be prepared under planning or TA. And most of this information is from the outline that is provided in the technical package. But rather than just reading off what you can see on the outline, I bolded and kind of included some notes on things that I've seen that missing a lot of times that I want to make sure I highlight here. So first and foremost, the project report must be signed and stamped by a registered professional engineer or PE. Oftentimes I see this left off, and we have to request that information, which might be difficult if it's been, you know, a couple of years and the consultant's no longer working on the project. So that can get difficult. So it's important to get that information right away. For the project area, we are looking for vicinity and service area maps, current land use and land use trends. We want a system user breakdown and any new users that are expected, maybe as the result of the project or in the near future. Possibly, you know, there are some other developments that are going on in the area. We want to know that information. We know the current population and population trends. So the biggest thing I see missing a lot of times is that population projections must come from an independent source. It can't just be based off of, you know, best estimates. The one I see probably the most often are sourced from the Department of Finance. So I would look up that information and instruct the consultants to look that up as well. So this section refers to the wastewater characteristics of the existing facilities. So we want to know, you know, basically a description. We want treatment schematics, any pertinent design capacities, flows, anything like that. And we want to know about any industrial sources, any discharge violations, and basically, you know, any wastewater influent and effluent characteristics and variations. Sometimes we do get questions related to, well, what's the existing facility, especially if it's a septic to sewer project. For the existing facilities, you know, some information would be helpful as available related to maybe the septic tanks or the community's wastewater characteristics. But a lot of times what we see here, if they are connecting to an existing sewer system, then we'll want the existing facility information related to that system. Some things that I don't see that often and usually have to request are the past efforts to address the problem through operational improvements and the current asset operation and maintenance management system. So that's just information we want to be included in our review. Another thing to keep in mind is that we check and evaluate the excessive I&I to the system. If the average daily flow is above 120 gallons per capita per day, or the wet weather flow is above 275 gallons per capita per day, a sewer system evaluation survey is required. So it's important to check that information. Here we want, you know, basically what's the reason for the project and what is the objective and expected benefits for the project. We want to know any pertinent, you know, permitting requirements and what is required for efficient treatment. Another thing we want to know is the relevant operation and on-site requirements. Does the future project require a change in operator grade certification or things like that? We also want projected flow rates. So for wastewater treatment facilities, those are the flows that maybe we most typically see. I would say the most important ones would be the per capita flow and any peaking factors that were used, the average dry weather flow, and the peak wet weather flow. For the non-treatment works facilities, we'll want flow projections up to 40 years from the initiation of operation. And then, are there additional facilities or actions needed to comply with the permitting requirements? So this would be a section where if there are additional projects that the system is working on, you know, through DFA or elsewhere, then we need to know that information and like what the status is on those efforts. All right, and then now I'll talk about the project alternatives analysis. So this is probably where we have the most questions and request the most information. The thing I see missing most of the time is the life cycle or net present worth cost estimates and the parameters associated with that. When we say detailed alternatives analysis, you know, that varies depending on the project, right? So for a treatment plant project, we could be talking about, you know, different treatment alternatives by, you know, secondary or tertiary or disinfection alternatives. So those tend to be fairly lengthy. With, you know, sewer rehab or collection system projects, I've seen some where you're evaluating what's the best construction method to use, and is it worth it to replace all of this line, or can it be rehabbed? So things like that. For septic to sewer projects, it might be, you know, a conversation about can they connect or not. So I've seen, you know, pretty much those, you know, vary basically depending on the project. So for each alternative, we want a comparison of not just capital costs, we want comparison of the life cycle costs as well. So that is related to the O&M and replacement costs. And yeah, there may be some no cost considerations that were considered as well, and we'll want information on that as well. So for the selected project, of course, we'll want a detailed description of the project and what the basis for selection was. We'll want, again, a life cycle cost estimate with all of that information. For the cost index, the one I've seen the most often is the engineering news record. And we'll want to know the useful life of the project, the detailed schedule, and the permits required, if any. This is an opportunity to say whatever maybe environmental doc permits are needed or some other ones as well. And then these are kind of more project-specific information that we might request. So for treatment facility projects, we'll want to know what chemicals are added during treatment, the number and volume of tanks, ponds, and/or clarifiers, the disinfection contact time or dosage, and the plant classification and operator grades. And we want to know if the plant classification is subject to change, because that might trigger a need for a higher grade operator as well. So that is something that we do check. For pump lift stations, we'll want to know the pump station components and the pump type, what design method was used, the wet well depth, and the number of active and standby pumps. The rest of that information is fairly detailed and may be available through maybe the pump manufacturer or something like that. So just some things to keep in mind there. For solids handling facilities, we'll want to know what class of sludge it is, the sludge volume per day and the sludge mass per day, the fate of the centret used in the process, and the efficiency of that process. For the sewer rehab and replacement projects, we'll want to know information about the existing pipe and the pipelines that are going to be constructed. We'll want to know the flows attributed to I&I within the system, the sewer system management plan information. You know, sometimes this document is named something else, like a master sewer plan or something like that. Basically, we just want the document that states, you know, how is the sewer system being managed, essentially. We'll want to know the miles of force mains and or any other pressure systems, and the miles of gravity sewer as well. And we'll want the number and length of laterals and manholes being replaced. And then for projects serving unsewered communities or septic to sewer communities would fall under this category. Again, we'll want the miles of force main and other pressure systems. and the miles of gravity sewer, the number of service lateral connections, the approximate footage of laterals. We'll also want to know, who is responsible for lateral construction on the private right of way. Is that something that is going to be bid out as part of the project? Or is that going to be the homeowner's responsibility and we're only paying for the public right of way? So that's something we want to know about. Again, we'll want to know what the information about the pipelines being installed. We want to know if there's a specific time frame for connection that may be based off of a current enforcement order or things like that. If the unsewered community is a mobile home park, we'll want to know that information as well. And something that we're asking for is the public outreach effort. So we want to know, how much public outreach has been done in this community. What's the response? Things like that. Do they understand that maybe, some of the things that happen with septic to sewer projects and projects serving underserved communities is that we might have a condition for funding that the community residents must connect within a certain time frame, and that is stated in the funding agreement. So we want to make sure that they understand if there is a time period that they're aware of it, and they understand that they need to connect within a certain time frame. So I'm actually going to pause there because that was a lot of information. So if anyone has any questions related to the project report, now's the time to ask. I see another raised hand. All right, can you ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So just a little housekeeping, and I'm not sure if you went over this, but I just received a couple of questions from some of our staff that they don't know how to raise their hand. So do you mind going over that?
Yeah, of course. So if you go to the Zoom participant, I believe it's the participant. If you click on that button, there's an option that says raise hand. It's not showing for me because I think I'm the presenter, but
the raise hand appears at the, it's a little button on the bottom right corner of the participant screen.
did that work?
So I think, and let us know if this works. If you wiggle your mouse, you'll see the participant button at the bottom. And if you click on the participant button, it pops up and you can see everybody, and then you scroll down and you can click raise hand.
Yes.
Okay, great.
That
it works because Mary just raised her hand.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right, let me try to catch anybody. Ibby, let me know if I missed anybody. If anyone has any questions related to the project report, I know that was a lot of information, so.
I don't see any raised hands right now.
Okay.
If you have a question, please raise your hand. Let us know so we can unmute you.
Yeah, so we're approaching 10 a.m. here, so I think now might be a good chance to take a break.
Okay.
And maybe we can come back at 10:10 and we'll pick up on the rest of the technical package, if that's all right with everyone.
Yes. We'll reconvene at 10:10.
All right, thank you. notified the entity responsible for the general plan. We do request that information if the second box is checked. And this is another form that must be signed by the authorized representative. The next certification form is for compliance with water metering. And nothing too crazy here. It should be signed by the authorized representative. Another certification form is the certification for a fiscal sustainability plan. So basically, the Clean Water SRF program requires what's called a fiscal sustainability plan, or an FSP, be prepared. And this certification form basically says that either a plan will be developed, and typically we require this to be completed by the end of construction, or if a FSP has been completed, to say that it has been developed and implemented, please submit a copy of that FSP so that we can review it if we haven't already. And again, this form must be signed by the authorized representative. So the fiscal sustainability plan should at minimum include these items. Again, this is an eligible planning cost and TA cost to develop and prepare this FSP. This language is from the Clean Water SRF policy. Another certification form, this time for the cost and effectiveness and water and energy conservation and efficiency. This certification form is actually signed by the PE responsible for the project and not the authorized representative, and unless they are the PE responsible for the project. Attachment T3 is the climate change worksheet. The best resource to find out how to fill out and submit the applicable attachments for this form is the construction application instructions. Most of the time I've seen, now that we've had a couple of years of reviewing and submitting this document, that the engineering consultant prepares this form and provides some information in the attachments that are required as far as that goes. Basically, we want to make sure that these considerations were looked at during the development of the project, and just making sure that any climate change issues related to maybe the plant or the system is considered and brought to our attention. So we require the Regional Water Quality Control Board documents to be submitted with the application. There's a whole list of attachments there of what this actually means and what we typically see be submitted. Obviously, the most common one would be the waste discharge requirements or the NPDES permit for treatment plant projects, and any associated enforcement orders, such as time schedule orders, cease and desist orders, and administrative civil liability orders. If the permit is in the process of being updated, the report of waste discharge can be submitted. And the development and submittal of the report of waste discharge is an eligible planning and TA cost as well. For the collection system project, there are two general orders, and I have them listed there, that typically get into, what to do in the event of an SSO and things like that, that we expect to be submitted. For any other projects that might have a discharge prohibition or moratoriums issued by the State Water Board, the Regional Water Board, or the County Board of Supervisors, we will want that documentation as well. We see this a lot of times with septic to sewer projects, depending on where they are in the state. But again, this document may not be applicable for unsewered communities that are preparing their selected construction project is a localized treatment option. But maybe at that point, hopefully they'll have maybe a report of waste discharge or something like that if it's a permittable new plant. if it is like a septic to sewer community that is connected to a larger agency, then we will want copies of that larger agency's permit requirements. I talked a little bit about this earlier, the petition for change related to water rights. We will want copies of that submitted. And then this is a new certification form. This is the certification for water conservation and water management, and nothing too crazy here. Again, this is a form that must be submitted by the authorized representative. And the last two technical package attachments are related for water recycling projects. They are the recycled water market assurances and the user connection schedule. Again, I haven't seen these come up very often. This is specifically for water recycling projects. Any questions about the technical package before I move on? All right, then I'll start talking about the post-executed funding agreement process. A lot of you maybe don't have a lot of experience in this, and that's okay. My goal in this is maybe to help TA providers and systems understand what is expected to be submitted after the initial agreement is executed. A lot of times it feels like, oh, we got over that first hurdle, which is great, but there are still items that we expect to be submitted after that happens, and you know, some administrative things that possibly TA providers can help the systems with. So first, I'll talk about the final budget approval package, or FBA package. So this is the FBA process. So the recipient goes out to bid and selects a contractor for the project. Sometimes that's multiple contractors, depending on how they bid out the project. Once that happens, the recipient submits the FBA package to DFA. And there are 3 reviews that happen, and possibly 4. There is a technical review that is done by the project manager, and then there is a Davis-Bacon review and a disadvantaged business enterprise, or DBE review, that is done by other DFA staff, and those reviews are pretty much done concurrently. If the project cost has changed or has increased, I should say, then the project manager will request an updated financial review be done. That might require additional information to be submitted, and in case it's been a while since the financials were looked at, they might want, you know, the new audited financials or something like that if they have any questions related to updating that review. Once all the reviews are complete, then the project manager prepares and routes the project file for a final funding agreement. And then once the final funding agreement is executed, you know, all the other project costs are eligible for reimbursement. So this is the FBA package form. It's fairly straightforward. Some notes here to consider. You see here that there is an SRF financing summary breakdown. This is basically what will be on the disbursement forms and in the final funding agreement. The section should reflect the amount being requested from DFA only. And then number 4 is the total financing summary. So this section should reflect the total project cost from all funding sources. And then this is a form that must be signed by the authorized representative. And then this is the list of attachments that are required to be submitted as part of the FBA package, which I will get into in the next couple of slides. So first, we want any copies of any bid protests and the resolution to those bid protests. Please note that all protests must be resolved before the FBA is approved, and the State Water Board does not participate in resolving bid or contractual disputes. The plans and specs should be signed and stamped by a PE, and any addenda that were prepared should be submitted as part of the FBA package. Plans and specifications can be submitted early in maybe prior to the FBA if you want PM review of it before the project goes out to bid. And in fact, we actually encourage that just to make sure that the what it was being designed is consistent with the scope of the project that we approved. And plans and specifications can be prepared under planning as well. We also want the Davis-Bacon wage rate determinations. So the guidance can be found on the state website, and it's there. One thing to note is that the Davis-Bacon wage determination date should be within 10 days of the bid opening date, or if the contract was awarded 90 days after bid opening, then the award of contract date. If the person at DFA notices that the wage determinations are incorrect, normally what happens is that there will be a no cost change order that occurs after the construction contract has been executed, just to update those wage determinations. Attachment 6D is where you submit the final appropriate waste discharge requirement permit, or anything related to that, if the permit has been updated since, the initial agreement has been executed. Attachment 6E is the tabulation of all bids or proposals received, and then 6F is a copy of the bid that was selected. If the low bidder was not selected, we'll need an explanation of why that, why it was not selected. We will also want a copy of the schedule of values prepared for the project. Typically, the schedule of values isn't developed until after the notice to proceed has been issued and the construction contract is executed. That is okay, but please note that the schedule of values is what we use to base our disbursement forms on. So if we don't have that, we'll use the bid items listed in the design documents as a basis for that disbursement form. So if there are any changes to that, you need to let us know so we can alert our disbursement staff. 6H is the evidence of advertising for the project, and 6I is all the DPE documentation. The notice to proceed in construction contract, a lot of times, especially with the small systems, they don't feel comfortable executing these documents until funding has been secured, and we understand that. So it can be issued and submitted after the final agreement is executed, provided that the selected contractor is aware of what's going on. And then if any value engineering was done, we'll want a copy of the value engineering study. And then if there are any items that were required per Exhibit D of the initial funding agreement that are required prior to starting construction, we'll want copies of those permits. Typically what I see are the environmental permits that are required prior to construction starting. So any questions about the FBA package?
I don't see any raised hands or emails.
All right. So we'll keep chugging away here. So I'll talk about the construction, what I'm calling the construction administration process. So once the final agreement is executed, this is during this time while construction is ongoing, the recipient submits claims and status reports, and inspections are done by the project manager of the project site. You know, depending on, you know, when in the process, it's kind of up to the PM and their schedule. At minimum, they need to complete the final inspection. And then during the final inspection, the due date for the project completion report is established. Typically, we like to see that before the final disbursement for the project has been submitted to DFA. And then once that happens and the final disbursement is submitted, the construction project is complete. If any point during this process an amendment is needed, we will review the request and approve it, and then prepare the project file for the amendment routing process. Status reports. So these must be submitted at minimum quarterly. If they're not received, one of the things that we do check when we're reviewing claims is whether or not status reports are up to date. If they're not, the claims may be put on hold. So this information is in the funding agreements, but generally for pre-construction activities, so if the project hasn't started construction yet, maybe it's in design or preparing to go out to bid, we'll want that information listed there. Summary of progress to date, percent design complete, and percent invoiced, the estimated bid opening date, and then if there are any changes to the project scope that might affect the environmental review done for the project, we'll want to know about that as well. While construction is ongoing, we'll want a list of that information there. Basically, description of progress since the last report, percent construction complete, percent contractor invoiced, and percent schedule elapsed. We'll also want a description of compliance with environmental requirements. Our environmental staff do review the status reports and make sure that everything is in compliance. We'll want a description of the change orders issued, any problems encountered, and pictures of the project site. All right, so disbursements. Construction costs are not available for reimbursement until after the final agreement is executed. There are cases where the deputy director can authorize the disbursement of up to 10% of project funds for reimbursement of the eligible construction costs and pre-purchase materials prior to execution of the final agreement. That doesn't happen though unless the FBA review process has been completed. Adjustments can be made between line items on the final request for disbursement. DFA must receive the final disbursement request by the date stated in the funding agreement. And when requesting reimbursement, there are disbursement forms 259, 260, and 261, and the disbursement request guidance that is emailed to the recipient upon execution of the agreement. So the forms must be mailed with the backup documentation attached to the DFA disbursement staff. Do not mail it to the project manager. Mail it to the DFA disbursement staff. And Form 261 must be signed by the authorized representative, and the original or wet signature must be sent to DFA. At this time, while we are all teleworking, one added step here is that the disbursement requests can be uploaded to FAST as well. And then amendment requests. The most common amendment I see for construction projects is when the recipient is unable to meet the completion of construction date. So if if an extension is needed, then that request must be submitted no less than 90 days prior to the current CC date stated in the funding agreement. And then important thing to note here, the project funding cannot be increased after the execution of the final funding agreement. There are certain rare cases where the planning and design costs are increased after the initial funding agreement is executed, but more often than not, we'll increase all of those costs together after the FBA has been approved in the final funding agreement. And then some things to know about project inspections. TA staff are more than welcome to join and participate in these project inspections, depending on schedule and workload. Inspections can occur before construction, during construction, or at completion of construction. PMs may request the project documentation, such as the AIS certification letters and any compliance with special conditions, like those environmental special condition documentation prior to inspection. If you have questions about AIS, please refer to those websites. Typically, those documents are the responsibility of the contractor because they receive them from either the supplier or the manufacturer, but it's still important information to know. During the inspection, the project managers will inspect project components, verify compliance with AIS and project scope, take photos and notes, check project signage and the Davis-Bacon signage as well, and then check operator certifications and verify that the O&M manuals are available at project completion. And then project completion. So project completion report is required to be submitted to DFA and the appropriate regional board on or before the due date established at the time of final inspection. And then a list of the information that that the report should include is listed there and is also in the funding agreements. We want a description of the project, the water quality problem, any discussion of the likelihood of addressing that water quality problem, summary of compliance with environmental conditions, and pictures of the project site throughout construction. And then another thing to note is that there might be some special conditions as part of the funding agreement that must be met either by completion of construction or within a certain time frame of completion of construction. So here I'm thinking about for septic to sewer projects, if we have a special condition that requires that residents must be connected within a certain time frame, we will follow up on that date and ask what the progress is on that and a report to be submitted. So with that, that concludes my prepared training slides. I'll open it up to questions at this time.
Maureen, we have a question from via email.
Okay.
And it says, it would be a good idea to explain where or how to upload the reimbursement request to FAST. So I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that is basically done under the same FAST pin that you use to submit the application. Basically, you scan the disbursement request and upload it to FAST.
And if you have questions, you can always send an email to the FAST help desk, and we can provide guidance step by step. We have another question in the queue.
All right.
And my mouse won't let me move over there. Why? Just a second and see if it works. I don't have mouse control. Can you click on Joe?
Oh yeah, here, let me
do
that here. So I'm gonna unmute Joe here. Hi, Joe.
Hi, good morning. This is Joe Hyde with Self-Help Enterprises. I had actually a question from the beginning in reference to eligible applicants and the IUP. In the drinking water IUP, a mutual, like a 501c12 formation is eligible for funding, whereas in the clean water, it specifically states 501c3. Is there a reason why those two fundings would be different?
You know, my guess would be regulations. I know that drinking water, they have technically maybe a wider net of eligible applicants than what I've seen from clean water. So that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And then, Jennifer Toney is my supervisor, and it sounds like she might have something to add there. Jennifer, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Yes, you're correct. So the private entities currently are not eligible for anything under the Clean Water SRF umbrella. So, and one of the reasons for that is regulation, and then also because the Clean Water SRF program and our small community grant program are kind of way over prescribed to allow those private entities to be applicants, because we have more applications in-house than we can fund for the publicly owned treatment works. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
All right, it does. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Let's give folks a couple of minutes in case they're formulating their questions.
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of information to throw at you, so I understand if you need some time to digest it all.
We have a raised hand from Sue. Let me go ahead and unmute her. Oh. Sue, I see your hand, but I can't unmute you, and I don't see an icon for a microphone next to you. So I'm going to skip to Mary. Sue, if you could send me an email, I will read your question. Mary, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed to ask this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm a really slow learner, so I'm loving what you're giving us, but it is a huge amount of information. So I'm wondering if you're going to do this training again. I would really like to sit back and kind of absorb what you've told and look over the materials and then do this again. Is that possible?
So this training is being recorded, so you will be able to refer back to it. As far as plans to do the training all over again, I'm not sure if there are plans at this time.
Thanks, Mary. We'll take that into consideration, and we'll, after this training series, we'll regroup, and we'll let you know if there's any additional training opportunities. Okay, I have a question from Sue. Oh, where is the recording available? So right now we're recording this training. Once we have double checked it, made sure it's complete, good to go, we'll share that information on where you can find the recording so you can listen to it, watch it again one more time. Any other questions? Oh, we do have some other questions. Mary, I'm gonna unmute you. Or not. It doesn't seem to be working. I'm gonna skip and come back.
I didn't mean to raise my hand again. I'm sorry.
No worries. I'm gonna mute you and lower your hand. Okay, our page, can you please ask your question? I can't unmute you either.
Oh, no, you unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Rod Page with RCAC. Earlier, you in the presentation, you mentioned that the low bid was not required to accept that. What are the justifications that you need if we're not accepting the low bid?
So the one that I've seen probably most often is that after review of their bid, maybe they didn't comply with maybe the good place efforts or the other DBE requirements. So things like that. Does that answer your question?
Well,
sometimes the low bid does protest the selection of the other bid. So that documentation will need to be submitted as well.
okay, well, I did this work previously with the federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation, and sometimes we could justify not taking a lower bid because there was history with that particular contractor that wasn't positive. Is that acceptable as well?
You know, I can't speak because that sounds like it might be a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm.
I personally haven't run into that, but we would have to review that justification.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, give you a couple minutes. Maureen, I have a request from one of the attendees. If we could send the PowerPoint presentation in slides as opposed to the handouts, because it's hard to read the details on the handouts.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Again, if you don't have questions right now, but you have questions later, you're more than welcome to send them to my attention, Epian Rivera at the Water Board, or you can reach out to your grant manager, and they will be able to either answer the question directly or get the answer for you.
Yeah, and at this time, you know, I'd like if any of the other DFA staff, I see a few on the participant list. If you want to say anything at this time, maybe something I've forgotten or things you want to share with the group, please do so. Oh, and I should mention that this training was just on the Clean Water SRF construction project process. Hopefully in the near future, a training on the Clean Water SRF planning process will be available shortly. So stay tuned for that.
Sorry about that. With no questions in the queue, no questions in my email box, I think we can wrap up this training. I wanted to thank Maureen for doing a very thorough training on the Clean Water SRF construction application and the process. I have a couple announcements. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund application training has been rescheduled for Wednesday, the 30th of September. Information about that training, the Zoom with meeting materials will be sent right before that training date. We are also holding our next training for TA providers on the environmental package next Thursday, which is August 27th at 9 a.m. If you have not registered, please send us an email, RSVP. We will be sending an updated flyer with a new training. That training will be geared towards the environmental consultants used by the TA providers. So if you are working with a environmental consulting firm on an application or have or plan to, you should encourage them to attend this training. We'll send out the meeting date and meeting information at a later time. Again, thank you for attending today's training. We appreciate your time. If you have any additional questions, please direct them to ebion.rivera@waterboards.ca.gov or to the grant manager assigned to the provider.
I see Kim has her hand up.
Sure, let's unmute Kim. Thanks, Maureen. Hi, Kim. Kim?
Oh.
Did we not unmute her?
Mute it. I shouldn't say unmute. Okay.
There we go.
There you go. I think it asked me the question, unmute and stuff like that. Thank you, Ipion and Maureen, for setting this training up, and Maureen to spend time put the training together. One more thing that I want to, I don't know if I missed it from Ipion's announcement for the environmental package. I think Ipion, don't we have a training, environmental training for TA providers, subcontract environmental folks?
Yes, correct. I'm planning to send out the revised flyer with that meeting date and time, and encourage all TA providers to invite their environmental consultants to join us.
Yeah, so this training, I think that, you know, at the beginning, about a couple of years ago, we had some sort of kind of conference call with TA, certain like individual TA providers and their environmental firms, the environmental firms that they've been working with, to talk about, you know, the requirements in the environmental. So we extend that offer that training to all TA providers, environmental firms that you've been working with so far, because, you know, sometimes we see that some of the environmental documents produced through TA are really excellent. Some are missing a lot of information. So we thought that, you know, it's best to provide that training again, just, you know, give the environmental firms our expectations in terms of documents for the environmental documents. And I know this training it had gone longer than, you know, we expected, but especially we went into the after the agreement. Some of you providers don't have that experience, some do. However, you know, we are planning on having technical assistance provider to help system carry out their construction projects in the future, because there are a lot of small systems that are not able to carry out the project, you know, so the project is like delay and all that. So this is something, you know, we are planning on using more and more in the future. So I appreciate, you know, Maureen talk about it, so you have an idea what we're looking for after the funding agreement. With that, like Maureen said earlier, you know, if you have questions about filling out the applications or something like that, don't hesitate to contact your grant managers. My staff and James' staff will help, you know, help you guys navigate that to submit a good application that, you know, we don't have to go back and forth after the work plan or the AR is closed. With that, I don't think I have anything else. Ipyon, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Kim. So I am unmuting Dat Tran, who is our program manager.
I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and Maureen for taking your valuable time to do this for us. I just want everyone to know that as provider, we really appreciate how you are helping the water system and working with us. And internally, we are working, you know, having a better strategies for the grant managers who's working with you and working as far as connecting you to the the project manager. So they are working together so that when you finish your product, that it's gonna come in and the application is gonna be, you know, complete and ready to go. So, so please, you know, work with your grant managers and, you know, we are, the grant managers are working with the project managers. So we are doing everything we can, and we really appreciate all your help. So, and also this is, I know that this video is recorded, so we will be sending this out, right, to everyone on here, so you can rewatch it. And if you wasn't not sure that you heard something or misheard something, you can go back and look at it, okay? And thank you so much, Avian, for navigating and hosting, be the host for this. And Kim and the whole team. Thank you.
Thanks, Dat. Thanks, everybody. We'll send a follow-up email with the PowerPoint presentation in its entirety and the revised flyer. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Yes. ¿Qué? Dice, entra.